Hello there, it's Cassie. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today I'm doing a special collaboration with my friend, Dawn Marie. She's so sweet. So this is the stamp set we were challenging ourselves to use because we both have it. And then we sort of decided on a color palette, but I'm pretty sure neither one of us stuck to it. So here's what the colors that I ended up choosing. So let's go ahead and get started stamping, and I'll talk a little bit more about the collaboration here in a minute. So this stamp set's called Spooktacular Friends from My Favorite Things, and I am going to line up the stamps inside of my Mini Misty along with some Express It cardstock, and then I'm going to close the door of my Misty and I'm going to ink up those 4 stamps using some Memento Tuxedo Black ink. I showed you the Copic colors that I plan to color with, so I'm going to, and these both, the Express It cardstock and the Copics, or the Memento Tuxedo ink, are alcohol marker friendly, and what that means is that it won't bleed, and it works really well with that particular paper. Alright, so then I'm going to go ahead and stamp the little owl out as well, just on another scrap of that same kind of cardstock. And then we're going to get ready to do some coloring. Now I'm going to start off just going, double time like I normally do, but I'll eventually just really speed it up. I know people really enjoy the coloring, so it's going to be in here. But for this first little image, we're going to go this is just double what I normally would color. This is double the speed, but we're gonna speed it up 4 times here in a second. All right, when I'm coloring, I typically like to go lightest to darkest. I've said this before. I know that for a lot of people, darkest to lightest works best for them. It just does not work that great for me. So that's what I do. And I encourage you, just because others are doing it one way, try it the other way. Maybe it'll work better for you if you're having a hard time. And of course, the key is always practice, practice, practice. I'm using, like I said, I'll put up all the colors on the screen so that you have an idea of what it is I'm using. And then we're going to go ahead and talk about the collaboration. So as I said, this is a collaboration with my sweet friend Dawn Marie. I have pretty much known her since I started YouTubing. I think maybe a little less than that, but she's awesome. She's an encourager. She has a great channel, and that girl can color. So if you enjoy Copic coloring, you should definitely head on over and subscribe to her. Subscribe to her anyway. But she does these beautiful florals, and she always adds a lot of sparkle, and I don't know. I could just watch her color all day. She just does a beautiful job coloring. So like I said, we had decided we were going to use this particular stamp set because we both had it, and we tried to stick to a color palette. But I think if you look at what we did, yeah, we didn't do the same thing at all. But hey, this is great because she came up with a ton of ideas and examples to use this stamp set, and I have 3. So this is a 3 cards, 1 stamp set kind of video, and so you're going to walk away with a ton of ideas to use this stamp set. Okay, so back to the coloring. I typically pick my colors. I will come up with a color scheme, and then I will pick my alcohol markers based off of that color scheme, and usually pick a couple that would match with it and go with it, and then I set those out. I feel like that's a little bit more efficient for me to just do it that way rather than just to stare at all my colors and pick one out and then start going. I like to just start with a color palette and go from there. So if you have a tendency to, as you're coloring, you sit there for an hour or more trying to figure out what colors to use, head over to Pinterest. This is where we came up with our ideas for our color challenge, if you will. But head on over to Pinterest and look up color combos, and then just challenge yourself to pick one of those. And then when you pick one of those, head to your colors, whatever markers that you use or coloring medium that you use, and pull that out. And then just challenge yourself to stick with that. I'm telling you, it is so much fun. So much fun. The cards that I came up with today are probably my favorite of all the Halloween cards that I have made. These are probably, I think this is number 9 or 10 in my series. So, I'll have to try and remember. But yeah, so I think these ones ended up being my absolute favorite of all the Halloween cards that I have made so far. So there's your challenge, kids. Go on out and do that. Grab some colors and just get going. All right, now that I'm done with my coloring, I'm going to fussy cut out all those images, and we're going to start with card 1. We're finally going to get to card 1. I'm not sure if you saw the cards from Stamptember using the Tim Holtz stamps, but there was one in particular, a group of 4, and it was done by Stacy from Tattered Nest Designs, and I'll have it linked down below. But I was really inspired by that to give a try. Now, I don't have all the colors that she has, and I'm actually going to improvise here. So she used Distress Stains, but I don't have those. So I have Dylusions. I have Dylusions inks, and I do have a little bit of Distress Oxide. And so that is what I chose. So that circle was cut out of Yupo paper because it doesn't stain. And you'll see, I mean, it stains a little bit, but you can reuse it over and over and over again if you plan to do something like this. So I had a scrap of Yupo and I thought this would work out great. But you see how I stuck that in the middle and I sprayed my inks? And now I'm spritzing some water in the center. It's so cool because that water in the center will draw that color into the center and kind of make it look really eerie and creepy. And you can manipulate it a little bit, which is what I'm doing here. So the colors that I used for this were a couple of Dylusions colors. They were the Vibrant Turquoise and the Black Marble. And then I did use Distress Oxide spray in the color Faded Jeans. And she used, I want to say she used Distress Oxide in the color Black Soot, and everything else was a stain, which I think would be really cool. But I wasn't just going to go out and run out and buy all those. So my challenge to you is, if you do have some sprays, give this a try. If you like this, give it a try, see what you like, see what works. Maybe things will work, maybe things won't, but I thought this worked out pretty cool. It looks really eerie. And so now I'm just I took that Faded Jeans and I spritzed it all over, or tapped it to get splotches. And I'm also doing the same thing with some sheer shimmer spritz and just kind of tapping that all over, so that way I'll get a little shimmer like stars, and then it'll make it look even eerier. So there it is, completely dry, and we're going to move on to the rest of the card. I've got some, this is some sidewalk cardstock from Brutus Monroe, and I'm trimming it down just to try to make it look like a hill a little bit. And so I'm going to add some dimension by grabbing my Vivas Beauty brushes and some Hickory Smoke Distress Oxide ink, and I'll put that all over the top just to bring in a little bit of shadowing. And then I'm going to trim that down to fit the cover, or the front bottom part of my panel. My sentiment, I'm going to stamp with some VersaFine Claire Nocturne ink just at that bottom corner, and then I'm going to go ahead and adhere that to the front of my panel. So now it looks like I'm starting to build my scene. I'm just going to use the house, and I'm going to use the tree. So for the inside, I cut down some more of that sidewalk cardstock. I'm stamping out the tree, just using some of the Hickory Smoke Distress Oxide, and then the house will be stamped with some Faded Jeans Distress Oxide. And I wish I had stamped either another tree on the other side or just something, because it just looks incomplete. So I might go back and fix that later. And then I'll stamp my sentiment using that same VersaFine Claire Nocturne ink on the inside. So this is for my inside, and I had trimmed that down to 4 inches by 5 1/4, so it'll fit inside of my A2 size card. And now I'm going to adhere the front panel to the front of my card base. And that card base is just some navy cardstock I had in my stash. I'm using liquid glue to adhere these down. And then I'm also going to use that same liquid glue to adhere down the tree and the haunted house. And then it will really just make the scene. So this is so fun. I want to do this. I want to try it out with a whole bunch of colors. But, oh, isn't that cool? And I imagine you could get a different look just about every time, especially using different colors. So yeah, use what you have if you like this. And then I'm going to grab that W4 Copic that I had earlier, and I'm going to ground these so they don't just look like they're floating on that. And then I'll grab that W1 to blend that out just a little bit more. So it adds a little bit more dimension, and that's going to finish off the first card that I made. I kind of love how that turned out. For card number 2, I'm going to whip out the alcohol inks. I haven't done that in a hot minute, and I wish that I had been this whole time. I just love them. So let me tell you the colors that I'm using, and this paper is actually a heavyweight vellum. And so I started off putting down the color, which I should have put down the blending solution, because it did with this particular paper kind of stain it, but I end up fixing it. It works out. So the colors that I'm using in the order from top to bottom are Sunset Orange, Butterscotch, Lettuce, Smolder, which is an alcohol pearl, Mushroom, then Celestial, which is an alcohol pearl, and then Denim. And I guess I'd set it up sort of like rainbow order, potentially, maybe, but I guess I just lined them up and just started using them, and it worked out because I really, really like how these really, oh. So do this, disclaimer, do it in a well-ventilated area. I'm using a marker spritzer. So I'll have, like I said before, I have everything linked down below that I use, but using a marker spritzer to kind of get those to manipulate and move the way that I want them to. And I'm kind of like in some of the harsh lines, adding a little bit more color here and there where I feel like it's not quite as intense, and just getting those colors to kind of play well together. Just love it. Just works out really pretty. And so that's dry, and I end up I'm going to adhere that to a white card base here after a bit, thinking I was going to have it as a white card base, but it turns out later on that I don't. But for my sentiment, I just have some black cardstock, some Raven cardstock from Brutus Monroe, and I'm inking that up after using a magic powder bag. I inked it up with Versamark ink, which is just a clear sticky ink, and then I cover that with the alabaster embossing powder from Brutus Monroe, and then I'll heat set that till that is smooth and melted, and then I'll dump my coffee filter back into the container. And now I'm using the My Favorite Things Essential Fishtail Sentiment strips to cut that out. So I run that through my die machine, and I'm using some liquid glue. Normally with vellum you wouldn't use liquid glue, but because this is a heavyweight vellum and those alcohol inks are pretty dark, this ends up being fine. You really cannot tell. So as I said, I had originally put that onto a white card base, but I trimmed that down to 4 inches by 5 1/4 because I decided I want to put it on a black card base. And I'm using my T-ruler thinking this is going to have things straight, but it didn't. And I'm sure you can see, boy, that's not straight. So I had put foam tape on the back of my sentiment and also my little critters. And then I'm going to take off all the backing paper and adhere my little critters to the front. And I suppose that background sort of looks like it's maybe orangish ground where, with the blue sky, and they're running off to go do some trick-or-treating, but I really do like the way it ended up turning out. So I'll adhere that to my card base, which is just some Raven cardstock. I kind of wish that I had done that with the navy cardstock that I had used earlier, but hindsight, I'm going to stamp up my little owl with the Faded Jeans Distress Oxide on the inside, and I'll also stamp the sentiment that I plan to use on the inside with the VersaFine Claire Nocturne ink, and then I'll adhere that down with the liquid glue to the inside, and then that'll end up finishing off card number 2. These are just coming together so well, and I thought I was going to end up using that little mouse that you see up there in the corner, but I don't. I'll end up having to save him for something else completely. So that's card number 2. Alright, so on to card number 3, our final card for today. I have some Express It cardstock put into my MISTI, and I'm inking up that cute little jack-o'-lantern duo, but I'm going to also stamp it onto some masking paper because I want to make an entire line of these little pumpkins. So basically what I did is I started off just cutting off the one side of the small pumpkin. Eventually down the road I will have to cut the bigger side off as well because I need to stamp on that other side of the big pumpkin. And so in doing so, I'm just going to keep moving my paper, inking up my little pumpkin or my little jack-o'-lanterns, stamping them down, and then moving my mask with each stamp. And normally with a mask you can stamp it several times and you can probably save the mask, but in this case, because I stamped so many times, I ended up just throwing that mask out. It was easy to make and it didn't take up a lot of paper, so no big deal if I need another one. But yeah, I'll just keep going down the line, stamping out those little pumpkins, and here's what I'm left with. And I'm going to color those with the same colors that I used before. That's the E97 and the YR18 Copic. And I'll start off just using the E97, and then I will go over it with some shadowing with the YR18. And there they are, finished up. So now I'm going to fussy cut around all those. I wanted these, like I said, to be a border. So I'll fussy cut around all the top. Sorry that I'm off camera. I tend to do that in typical Cassie fashion when I'm fussy cutting. I'm not on camera, so you don't get to see it. But it was successful. So now I have some ARTEZA Expert Watercolor paper, because that was what was on my desk, and I'm using some Scattered Straw Distress Oxide, and then I'm going to ink up some Fossilized Amber. I'm using my mini ink blending tools. You could use your brushes if you wanted, but I love my mini ink blending tools if I want some intense color. And in this case, I definitely wanted some intense color. For the top part, I'm going to start off with some faded jeans after I clean up my mess. And then I'll just grab a scrap piece of cardstock to hold down the paper while I am sponging. And I'm just going all the way all the way to the center. I'm kind of overlapping these a little bit, but it's not that big of a deal because the pumpkins will go through that, so you really won't see it. And then my darker shade of blue is some chipped sapphire. So I'm going around all the edges with the chipped sapphire, and then I'm going to go back in and intensify that faded jeans, and then intensify the chipped sapphire even more. And then I'll clean up my mess once again. And then because I did it on watercolor paper, I am going to take some water. I'm going to spritz it into my hand and then just sprinkle it all over the front. And this, these are distress oxides, so they react with water or any sort of wet medium. And I love that look. It's just so, I don't know, it's just so pretty. And I feel like it's hard not to do it when you're using distress inks or distress oxide inks. I'm also going to grab out the sheer shimmer spritz and just spritz that, or not spritz it, but just splatter that all over my background as well. And then I'll clean up my mess, and then I'll heat set that so that is ready to go. For the inside of my card, I am going to take that same duo of pumpkins, and I'm going to just stamp that all along the bottom, just using some Spiced Marmalade Distress Oxide ink. And I'm not overlapping them, just stamping them right next to each other. And then my sentiment, I butted 2 sentiments up against each other, and then I'll stamp that with that VersaFine Clair Nocturne ink. And then that'll be ready to go for the inside of my card. And my card base is going to be some more of that navy cardstock that I had used earlier. But before I get to that, I am going to stamp out my sentiment on the front. And I use the Nocturne ink there as well. And so we'll just use some liquid glue to adhere this inside of my card to the inside of the card base. And then before I adhere the front panel, I'm going to adhere down those little pumpkins. And I'm just going to use the same liquid glue. I thought about popping it up on foam tape, but originally at this point I was sort of thinking that mouse that I had colored would go over the top of that, but it just would have been too busy. So I decided not to use him. So I've put down my pumpkins, and then I'm going to flip those over and trim off the excess. And then this will be ready to be adhered down to the front of the card. So I was looking at the mouse thinking, oh, he'd be cute, but I think he just makes it too busy. So I will save that mouse. I could easily have a 4th card if I wanted to. And I'll adhere this down to the front of my card, but that's not going to finish it there. I do decide to grab some Nouveau glitter drops in the color Night Sky. It was just perfect. It matched so beautifully. And now if you are going to use any Nouveau drops on top of Distress Oxide, you need to understand that it will soak up some of that color. So that's why this was kind of a perfect color to use, because it matched that background. So that'll finish off card number 3. I don't know which one was my favorite. I just really enjoyed making all 3 of these cards. But we're going to go ahead and take a look at the 3 cards that I made today. I would love to know which one was your favorite if you had one. Go ahead and leave that in the comment section down below. Be sure to head over to Dawn Marie's channel and take a look at what she did and get more ideas for this beautiful stamp set. And like this video if you liked it, and subscribe if you haven't already done so. And as always, thanks so much for stopping by.